He kissed them first. That's the part no one forgets. He bent over his sleeping daughters, kissed their cheeks, said goodbye, then stabbed them to death. But before that, he stabbed their mother. As she ran, as she screamed, this wasn't a robbery. This wasn't a stranger. This was her husband, the man she warned police about. But no one translated her words. He knew exactly what he was doing, and still he kissed them first. What kind of man murders his children because there's no car seat? Miguel Mejia Ramos, 28, had been drinking. He came home, scrolled through Daisy's phone, and saw a photo of her with another man. That was the trigger. This story isn't just about a brutal crime. It's about a system that failed to hear a woman in danger, a system that ignored her language, her fear, and her life. If this already breaks your heart, don't just scroll. Subscribe, because these aren't just stories. They're warnings. Warnings about what happens when we don't listen. Deisy García wasn't weak. She was smart, young, and brave. She left Guatemala to find a better life. In New York, she worked hard, raised her daughters, and lived quietly. But she was scared, and she knew why. Her husband, Miguel, was dangerous. So she did what she was told to do. She filed a police report. She wrote down her fear. She said he had threatened to kill her. She wasn't hiding. She wasn't silent. But she wrote the report in Spanish, her first language, and no one translated it. No one acted. No one knocked on her door to ask if she was okay. The system had the warning, and it sat there, unread. Deisy was not a statistic. She was a mother, a daughter, a woman who asked for help and was ignored. She wasn't waiting to be saved. She tried to save herself. Why do we build systems for women to speak if we refuse to listen in their language? She trusted that someone would read it, someone would hear her, someone would care. No one did. Miguel wasn't some stranger lurking in the dark. He was her husband. He lived in the same apartment, ate the same meals, tucked the same children into bed, and yet, inside, he was building rage, jealousy, control. He checked Daisy's phone constantly, watched her movements, accused her, isolated her. Friends noticed. But what could they do? He wasn't a monster they could see. He was a man who could smile in public and terrify in private. But most important, he didn't snap. He planned. He waited. Until the right moment. Until she was asleep. Until the girls were still. Until the apartment was quiet. This wasn't heat-of-the-moment rage. This was premeditated control. One final act to destroy everything he thought belonged to him. It wasn't just murder. It was erasure. This is who he was. A man who believed if he couldn't keep, no one could. And if he couldn't have his daughters the way he wanted, then they wouldn't live either. This wasn't confusion or loss of sanity. It was cruelty with intention. He waited. He watched. And then he acted. What happens in the days before a murder like this? In this case, there were warnings. Big ones. Clear ones. Deisy wrote a police report. In that report, she said her husband threatened to kill her. She didn't shout it in the street. She didn't scream into a void. She followed the system, but the system failed her. The report was written in Spanish, and no one translated it. It sat unread while her life ticked down. She did what she was supposed to do. She asked for help the right way, and the silence that followed sealed her fate. No knock at the door. No officer checking in. No interpreter called. The NIPT had her warning. They just didn't open it. Think about that. What if someone had simply read her words? Her life was already in danger, and she knew it. She tried to put it on paper. She tried to protect her daughters. That report could have saved 3 lives. One translation could have stopped a massacre. We ask victims to trust the system. But what if the system doesn't even speak their language? It was January 18, 2014. Cold, quiet night in Queens. Miguel had been drinking at a friend's house. Maybe brooding. Maybe planning. He came home around p.m. Deisy and the kids were already in bed. He looked through her phone, through her Facebook, and he saw something that pushed him over the edge. A photo of her with another man. He walked into the kitchen, picked up a knife, then another. He went to the bedroom. Deisy was asleep. She woke up as he stood over her. She screamed. She ran toward the girls' room. He followed her and stabbed her. She tried to escape. He stabbed her again, and again, and again. Blood soaked the floor. Her cries faded. He turned to the children. The next part it breaks people. He picked up Daniela, age 2, held her, kissed her, said sorry, then stabbed her. He walked to Yoselin, 1 year old, kissed her, then killed her too. He said he didn't know what else to do. He said he couldn't take them to Mexico because he had no car seats. Daniela was 2. Yoselin was 1. They were tiny, soft, still full of wonder. They were sleeping. They didn't know what was coming. They didn't see it, but he did. He looked at their faces, kissed them, asked for forgiveness, and then stabbed them. The act was personal, not rushed, not frenzied. He cradled them first. What does it take to hold your child and then decide to end their life? He later told police he didn't want to leave them behind, that he didn't have car seats to take them with him to Mexico. So he thought the solution was death. He believed it made sense, that it was mercy, that somehow killing them was better than letting them live. But mercy never looks like this. It's not mercy to make a child your final act of violence. They never had a chance to run, or scream, or understand. They died with his kiss still on their cheeks. What he destroyed in that moment wasn't just life, it was innocence. It's hard to speak their names now without feeling the weight of what was lost. Daniela, Yoselin, they were babies, and they deserved so much more. After the murders, Miguel didn't call for help. He didn't cry. He didn't try to undo what he'd done. Instead, he started thinking about himself, about escaping, about what came next. He claimed he tried to die, said he stabbed himself in the chest, then tried to hang himself with a cord, but neither worked. The wounds weren't deep. The rope wasn't strong. Some say he never really meant it, because not long after, he was packing, taking what he needed, getting ready to run. He didn't bury them, didn't cover their bodies, just left. He started driving south, headed for Mexico. What kind of man murders his family, tries to fake his own death, and then goes on a road trip? He wasn't overwhelmed with guilt. He wasn't panicked. He was calculating. And here's the part that tells you everything. He made it all the way to Texas. He got within 3 hours of the Mexican border before police caught up. No big standoff. No resistance, just silence. Because deep down, he knew what he'd done. He wanted to escape the punishment, not the guilt. He didn't want justice. He wanted distance. And if he hadn't been caught in time, he would have vanished. He would have left behind a blood-soaked apartment and a grieving family with no answers. That's not a man who snapped. That's a man who planned to walk away. Well, Mejia Ramos almost got away. 3 states. Over 1,000 miles. That's how far he ran. He left Queens and made it to Schulenburg, Texas. It's a quiet town, flat roads, gas stations, empty fields. That's where police found him. He was just 3 hours from the Mexican border. He had the car. He had a plan. But time ran out. He didn't resist. No fight. No chase. Just calm. Because in his mind, it was done. He'd already destroyed the life he claimed to love. When police questioned him, he didn't deny it. He admitted everything. He said he killed Deisy because of a photo with another man. He said he killed the girls because he didn't have car seats. That's what he said. As if it made sense. As if that explained it. The truth is, his words showed no real remorse. He was angry. He felt betrayed. So he took everything from her. Then he drove not out of confusion, but to escape justice. Police stopped a killer, but they couldn't bring back what he stole. 3 lives. Erased. And for days, he was almost gone, like it never happened. We always think monsters hide in shadows. But some of them drive minivans. Some of them stop for gas and coffee. And some of them, Miguel, would have vanished if the system hadn't finally opened its eyes. 6 counts. That's what he was charged with. 1st-degree murder. 2nd-degree murder. Criminal possession of a weapon. 3 lives. 1 brutal night. But then came the deal. Miguel Mejia Ramos pleaded guilty to 3 lesser counts of 1st-degree manslaughter. Not murder. Manslaughter. Why? Because prosecutors wanted to avoid a long, painful trial. Because Daisy's family didn't want to relive every detail. Because sometimes, the system makes a deal with the devil just to spare the living. The judge, Kenneth Holder, didn't like it. He made that clear in court. He called Mejia Ramos vile, despicable. He said even hardened criminals were disgusted by what he'd done, but the deal was made. And Holder had to honor it. He sentenced Miguel to 45 years in prison. That's 15 years for each life. 15 years for a woman who asked for help and was ignored. 15 years for a baby kissed and then stabbed. Is that justice? Is that enough? Because when you call something manslaughter, you imply it wasn't intentional, but this was planned, calculated. He didn't just kill. He followed through. So ask yourself, what's the message we send when we lessen the charge? What are we telling the next woman who files a report? Will she be heard, or will her killer walk out in 2048? Deisy filed her police report in Spanish, the language she spoke best. She clearly said her husband threatened to kill her. This was a cry for help, but her words never got translated. No one in the system spoke her language well enough to understand the urgency. That report sat, unopened or unread, in a folder somewhere. It wasn't just a mistranslation, it was a missed life, a missed chance to stop what happened. Every step in the justice and social system failed Deisy because of language barriers. The system is supposed to protect victims, but it only protects those it can understand. Imagine the fear she must have felt, knowing she tried to reach out but was invisible to the very people who promised safety. How many other women like Deisy have reports sitting in folders, their voices silenced by language? This case shows how language isn't just words. It's a matter of life and death. The system's failure to translate that report sealed her fate. The tragedy was preventable, but the system never spoke her language. And when victims speak a language no one listens to, their cries go unheard. Deisy's story forces us to ask, how many more warnings are ignored every day? How many lives could be saved by simply reading and understanding a single report? If we want to stop violence, we have to truly listen to every voice, in every language. Judge Kenneth Holder wasn't happy with the plea deal. He called Miguel Mejia Ramos vile and despicable. He said even hardened criminals were shocked by the crime, but the deal spared Deisy's family a long, painful trial. They didn't have to relive the horror in court. Holder said the sentence 45 years felt too light. He wished the death penalty still applied. His words echoed the anger of the courtroom, but the law forced his hand. What happens when the law and justice don't match? When a father kills his wife and 2 young daughters, and the charge is manslaughter, what does that say to victims? Does it say their pain is less? That their lives don't matter enough? Holder said no sentence could ever be enough for this crime, but the law made the best it could. The judge wanted to send a message to future victims and abusers alike, but the system limits what justice can be. In the end, Miguel will spend decades behind bars. But can a prison sentence ever heal a wound like this? What does justice mean when it feels incomplete? Holder's anger reveals the truth. The system sometimes fails the victims it's meant to protect. Deisy García wasn't silent. She screamed through her report, her words written in fear. She tried to warn the system. She tried to save herself and her daughters, but we didn't listen. Her plea, lost in translation, became her last act. She wasn't passive. She fought, but the system failed her. This story isn't just about a crime. It's about failure of language, of systems, of humanity. We must ask ourselves, what if someone had simply read her words? How many more lives are at risk because we don't listen? Because we don't translate? Because we don't act? Deisy's death is a warning, a call to change. If you have one chance to be heard, but no one listens, what is the cost? Her story demands we do better. We owe it to her, to Daniela and Yoselin, to every woman and child still waiting to be heard. This is why we tell these stories, not for shock or sensation, but to remember and to learn. Because silence is what killers count on. If this breaks your heart, don't just scroll away. Subscribe. Keep these stories alive. Because when we listen, maybe one day, this won't happen again.